Hey, Pastor Mike here. I just want to thank you for tuning in and let you know that we have more resources like this available for you on our website. Just a quick note before we begin though. While resources like this can help you grow in ways that God has ordained for you, they are no replacement for gathering with your local church on Sunday. And on that note, if you're not currently connected somewhere, we want you to know you're always invited to Grace Pointe. Visit our website for time and location, and we hope to see you soon. If you have a Bible, turn to John 13. The Gospel of John is beautiful in part because whereas every other gospel captures the Last Supper as if it were a quick occurrence, the Gospel of John shows that it went on and on and on. In fact, this supper occurred for so long that they were able to have lengthy conversations. Jesus had a very lengthy conversation with his disciples in which he said much to them. And we don't have time to go over all of it tonight. But what we will do is we will look at a portion of it, just John 13, and ask that the Lord would shape our taking of the Lord's Supper tonight through Jesus' own words, the lens of Jesus' own words. Randy Smith wrote, "With the arrival of Jesus Christ came the new covenant. He told his disciples during the Last Supper, 'This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood.' And the Lord made the arrival of the new covenant dramatically clear when the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, the moment Jesus died on the cross. This event is significant, and this event signified that the whole world, the whole system had been ended. The old system was gone and the new system was dawning." The author continues, "The holy place was now exposed, and redeemed sinners by the blood of Christ were given open and direct access to the throne of God." The signing of a new covenant happened at this dinner. What's unusual about it is in our context, when we see a bill go from being a bill to being a law, we see it happen at a president's desk usually. And the president doesn't have his friends around him. The president usually has reporters, political constituents, maybe some people in the room that are representative of those who will benefit from the law, at least as the public sees it. But Jesus is doing something different. He's signing a bill into a law. The proposed bill of forgiveness is becoming the law of grace. And who does Jesus invite to come to this signing? Well, he invites his friends, his closest disciples. And he doesn't have a desk there like the desk in the Oval Office, and he doesn't take out a quill and have some big ceremony. He has a meal with his friends. It's something that should stand out to us. Such a big event, the beginning of a new covenant, which he says is in his blood, represented by the blood, the wine that was passed around at the meal. This new covenant represented and signed in that blood, and yet it seems like such a simple meal. Well, if we sat under all his teachings, we would say it's anything other than a simple meal. It's the inauguration of something fantastic and beautiful. During Holy Week, God's proposed bill of forgiveness became the law of grace. He is a gracious host, and that is how we should see him as we come to the Lord's table tonight. We should see him as our gracious host, offering the things that the bread and the wine represent, his body and his blood, a meal we observe tonight. And when we do that tonight, when we take communion, we are taking in the benefits of Christ. We're consuming the things we believe are the benefits of the relationship we have with him, namely his sacrifice and his covenant. His sacrifice that we know that night he was about to step out the door and go make, be arrested and tried in order to go make the sacrifice that he willingly offered himself as. And the covenant, well, it's the one I just shared with you, the new covenant that is in his blood. As much as Jesus literally welcomed his disciples to the meal that we observe tonight, it is impossible to sit down to this meal and not look forward to Revelation 19, the great marriage banquet of the Lamb, and see that this is not the only meal we will share with our God. The angel who speaks in Revelation 9 speaks out over all human history and says, "Blessed are those," and if you know it, say it with me, "Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb." To take part in this meal is to say, I have received that invitation. And it's called the love of God given in his Son to me. And I've received it, and I've RSVP'd, yes, but I don't need to wait. I can start partaking of it now, the benefits of knowing him now, the benefits of grace now. And every time we take this supper, we remember it. And John 13 labels very clearly at least 4 things that are who Jesus is, who our host is. So we wouldn't ever send our children to a party without saying, I want to know the parents first, right? Well, we're going to learn who our host is, the one who invites us tonight. He exposes at least 4 parts of his character in John 13. The first thing is, he shows that he came to humble himself. He is a humble host. He doesn't show off his palace, though he could have showed us and done things that would be mind-blowing. He's humble. He hosted this in a home that wasn't even his own. It's remarkable. Our humble host. Look at verses 1 through 11 with me. Now, before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of the world to the Father, having loved his own in the world, he loved them until the end. During supper, when the devil had already been put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given him all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, on all of that, he made the decision to rise from supper. The King of the universe rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and he took a towel, and he tied it around his waist. And then he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet. And I don't have time to go into the cultural norms that would have prevented this at a Passover meal. In the middle of the meal, but he takes them by the feet and he washes the feet. You can imagine washing all of the dirt and the grime from first century calloused feet. Much worse than any person has to put up today with in any spa. But he washes them in love. And he came to Simon Peter, who said, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" And Jesus answered him, "What am I doing? What I am doing, you do not understand. But afterward you will understand what I'm doing." And Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." And Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no share in me." So Peter said, "Well, in that case, Lord, not all of my feet, but wash all of my hands and my head." And Jesus said to him, "The one who has bathed does not need to be washed except for his feet." In other words, he needs to be served by me, but is completely clean. And you are clean, he says, but not every one of you is clean. Verse 11, for he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, not all of you are clean. When the King of the universe should be sitting on a throne in heaven, he has purposely set out to be instead on earth in the dirt, holding the dirty feet of sinful men, washing their feet. The King of the universe, who should be on a throne above all of this, has humbled himself to the lowliest of settings. Similar to the way he was born, he finds himself in the lowliest of settings, humbling himself before those he plans to serve soon on the cross. And he does something for them that they can't even yet understand. But when they see the cross and they look back on the sacrifice there, they will know the meaning of the foot washing. He says, "You will know eventually what I have done for you here. I've served you and I've loved you well to the end." Tonight, our host is humble. And not just the type of humility represented in one act, but an act that represents his whole life and who he has eternally, today, and forever been. Our host is humble. And the God who welcomes you to partake tonight the benefits of his Son, he is holy, humble, not arrogant and haughty, but humble. And number 2, he is a role model of servitude for his children. He came and role modeled this. It wasn't that he just wanted to do it for them, but he was doing something that he wanted them to copy So he comes to this meal, he humbles himself before your host humbled himself before you and the other disciples, and now is role modeling something he wants you to mimic in what you see in the host of this meal tonight. Look at verses 12 through 17. When he had washed his feet and put on his outer garments, he resumed his place at the table. He said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so am I. If I then, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. Truly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who has sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." When he should be the one being served, he instead takes the position of the servant. What host does the serving in this setting? The host either has servants to serve or demands that the guests help. The servant is not the one to do. In fact, in the ancient world, the host of any event this big, which Jesus says this is a big event, would not have done something like this, and certainly wouldn't have waited on them by doing something like this. When he should be the one serving, he's the one that does the serving. And that shouldn't surprise us. In Mark 10, he said, "Whoever would be great among you shall be the servant, and whoever should be the first among you shall be the slave of all." Because even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. See, he takes a moment at the supper to do some serving, because that's what he's about to do on the cross. Everything he does at the supper is foreshadowing the cross. Tonight, the host is your servant. He waits on you. He sees to your needs. Your host tends to your wounds. Your host cares for you personally. The God who welcomes you to partake in the benefits of his Son tonight is serving you forgiveness on a platter. And number 3, he came to serve even those who would betray him. This is the noticeable part of the text, is that Judas was in that crowd. Judas had his feet washed. Look at verses 18 through 30 with me. "I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but the scripture must be fulfilled. He who ate the bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly I say to you, whoever receives the one that receives me, whoever receives the one I send receives me. Whoever receives me receives the one I send." And he continues on because the disciples notice what he just said. After these sayings, Jesus was troubled in his spirit, and he said, "Truly I say to you, if you haven't heard me already, one of you will betray me." And the disciples looked at one another. They were shocked at this. One of the disciples whom Jesus loved, we know that's John, the writer of this text, the disciple who Jesus loved was reclining at the table. When he was at the table by Jesus' side, so Simon Peter motioned to John to ask him who Jesus was speaking of. So it's one of these where you lean back at the meal, you make eye contact with John, and you go, "Ask him, what does he mean?" Because he knows John is right there. And all John has to do, literally, the text says, is lean back against his Messiah. He's that close. He leans back and speaks to his Messiah like this and asks, "Who?" So, "Lord, who is it?" he says. And in verse 26, Jesus answered, "It is the one whom I will give the morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. And Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do, do it quickly." Now, no one at the table knew why he had said this. Some of them thought it was because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor, maybe. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. When he would have had every right to excuse Judas from the meal and then stand to gird himself, and wash his disciples' feet. He instead looks his disciple in the face. He looks his betrayer in the face and welcomes him to have his feet washed. When we read John 3:16 and we teach our children to recite it and we hear, "For God so loved the world," we have to have the context that God is looking on a world full of people who will reject this kind of servitude, who will reject the cross, and yet he serves them. Make no mistake, regardless what we believe, I believe, you believe about election, never forget God's motivation for giving his son was a motivation of love for even his betrayers, whom the text just told us he loved well until the end. He loved Judas right until he left the room. Tonight, your host is more loving than you or I could ever hope to be, more loving than we can conceive of. If you are his enemy tonight, I have good news. He loves his enemies. When he said, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I'm saying to you, love your enemy, we can trust he loved his enemies well. Tonight, your host loves you. And the God who welcomes you to partake in the benefits of his Son serves even his betrayers. And lastly, he came to humble himself, to role model servitude, to serve, and to teach his children to love. To teach his children to love. Verses 31 through 35. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man to be glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and glorify himself at once. Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you," loving his enemies, "you are also to love one another. And by this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." When he could have rejected every rebel on earth, when he could have turned his back on humanity, when we deserved another flood, he instead came to model love and command that we show love. And this same apostle John, we know, wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and in that he says, we love because he first loved us. And that doesn't just mean that we love because we've had it modeled for us. It means we love because he has enabled us to love. His Spirit has come into us and plugged us into a powerful source of transcendent love that is able to do things that human love cannot. Human love would have just excused Judas, would not have served Judas with love until the end. Human love would not have gone to the cross. Human love would have run away like the disciples did. And we will learn more about tomorrow. Tonight, your host has shown you love and commanded that you love. You sit down to a table, and I want you to imagine at the end of the table is your host, and he is teaching you so many things, but at the end of the meal, he gives you a new command, something he calls a new command, a new law. You shall love one another. And it's an old new law. 1 John says that too. It's a new law, but it's an old new law because it sums up the Old Testament. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. But now the Spirit will undergird it with his own strength. And this is the Spirit he promises to his children. In John 15, I have more I want to tell you, he says at the end of the meal. But your little minds can't take it. That's a paraphrase. But I'm sending you a helper who will deliver to you the truth and teach you all things. So they're not alone in the command to go love. The Spirit is going to come help them love. But this host commands that we do it. And the God who welcomes us to receive the benefits, remember the benefits are the sacrifice and the covenant. We receive the benefits during communion. And this host commands that we take the invitation we've received called love and give that same invitation to others. This is the one who invites us to the table this evening. This is the one who invites us to consume the benefits, his sacrifice and his covenant. And this is the one whose words weigh on us tonight. The glory and the full weight of his words weigh on us tonight, including the word in John 14, I believe, where he says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. Where I'm going, you cannot come. And in the next chapter, he says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if I go, it means I'm going to come again to receive you, that where I'm going, you may be also. So every time your host welcomes you weekly to this meal, anytime you observe it, the full weight and glory of his second coming sit over the meal, because we take this meal looking forward to the great banquet that this is but a foreshadowing of. So we now prepare our hearts to take communion, knowing one day we will see him. We will sit at his banquet, at his table for all time. And this meal keeps our eyes on the cross. This meal keeps our eyes looking heavenward for his return. If you're trusting in Jesus this evening, you're welcomed to this meal. As we enter into it now, the ushers are going to come forward and prepare and distribute the elements. If you're trusting in Christ tonight and you know you sit under the new covenant, you've believed, this meal is for you. And if that's not you and you don't know where you stand, Jesus is offering you what he is offering in the text tonight: truth, belief, covenant, observing his sacrifice for you as the propitiation of your sins, his substitutionary death for you, that you would never die, but would live eternally with him. As you receive the elements, take them, hold on to them, and once they are distributed, we will take together.